IELTS with Coach Brad. Listening, Section 4. You are now going to hear a recording about the Asian financial crisis. You now have some time to read questions 1 to 10. Please be seated because it's time for this week's lecture on the Asian financial crisis. The Asian financial crisis originated in 1997 in Thailand, which had been enjoying significant economic growth in the years leading up to it. In fact, up until this point, the entire East and Southeast Asian region had been experiencing an economic boom which had been termed the Asian economic miracle.
Large amounts of money were flowing through the Thai economy. However, the country had built up a significant foreign debt.
Additionally, speculative traders, that is, investors looking for short-term profits, were attracted to the region by the generous interest rates on offer, and this had created somewhat of an economic bubble. When the Thai government ran out of foreign investment reserves, they were required to float their currency, whereas previously it was pegged to the US dollar, and as a result, a huge capital flight took place, with investors quickly withdrawing their money out of the economy, which greatly depreciated the currency. It wasn't necessarily that simple, however, as there were a number of contributing factors which, leading up to the Asian financial crisis, really added fuel to the fire, so to speak, and there has since been much conjecture over the true cause. One should start by focusing their attention on the United States, which had been through a period of low interest rates throughout the mid-1990s. However, interest rates began to rise, and this resulted in investors withdrawing their money from Southeast Asia and moving it to America. A second factor was that many private corporations in Asia received contracts by way of corruption and friendships with government officials instead of giving them to the most competitive companies, and this resulted in widespread inefficiencies. Furthermore, Southeast Asian exports, such as semiconductors, were already declining due to the rise in competition, mostly from China. So what were the consequences of the sudden economic shock, you might ask? As I mentioned earlier, after the US raised interest rates, the value of the US dollar increased significantly, and this made it much harder for Asian currencies to repay their debts, as many had been taken out in US dollars. There was also a sharp fall in asset prices, including the stock market and the valuations of large corporations. Private debt also surged, and the last consequence I'll mention is that lending institutions, such as banks, cut off the supply of credit to the region out of fear that they would not be repaid, making further investment in the economy difficult. So let's take a look at which countries were affected most by the Asian financial crisis. Perhaps a good place to start is Indonesia. They suffered a sharp contraction in GDP, and it's safe to say that the citizens were not happy. In fact, there were riots all over the country demanding that the president step down, and in May 1998, they got their wish, and the vice president was promoted to the top job. Japan was in a much stronger financial position than the rest of Asia leading up to the financial crisis and had strong foreign currency reserves, but of course it was in their best interest to preserve the strength of the region. Nonetheless, the biggest impact came as a result of losing competitiveness to regional rivals, which now enjoyed more favourable exchange rates for exports. Thailand, on the other hand, suffered widespread economic damage and increased poverty. Unemployment became a huge problem, as many domestic workers needed to relocate back to their home village, while approximately 600,000 foreign workers were forced to return to their home country. Those that kept their jobs often received reduced wages. In South Korea, the banking sector came under huge pressure, as many of their borrowers became unable to repay their loans. Several large corporations defaulted or were taken over, which had the effect of driving international investors away. As for Malaysia, the national GDP shrunk 6.2%, with the construction industry hit hardest, as that contracted a whopping 23.5%. In the late 90s, China wasn't the global force that it is now, yet their economy had been growing rapidly. This growth was slowed in 1998, but definitely not to the extent of their neighbours, and if anything, they benefited in later years due to a continued wave of incoming foreign investment. Even in the United States, whose currency had strengthened substantially, the economic situation in Asia led to a decrease in consumer confidence. Furthermore, stocks retreated, with the Dow Jones Industrial Index dropping 7% overnight, which forced the New York Stock Exchange to temporarily suspend trading. So you might be wondering how long the financial crisis lasted. Well, most countries stabilised their currencies and economies within a few years. Even Thailand, which had been hardest hit, was prospering again by 2001. The first and most important step was to prevent the wild fluctuations in currencies, so the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, contributed $40 billion in a program to prevent national economies from defaulting. The response by the international community had to be swift because the potential damage to the global economy could have been in the trillions of dollars. Southeast Asian nations also worked more closely together to improve the financial stability of the region by ensuring greater supervision over economic and financial practices. That is the end of section 4 of the speaking test. You now have some time to check your answers.